Good morning, grade 2s, and welcome back to WorksheetCloud. Welcome to your grade 2 maths lesson for today, and I hope you've had a lovely day so far and that you're ready to learn with me again. If there are any things throughout the lesson or after the lesson that you don't understand, or if you have a question, you can just ask mommy or daddy to send an email to grade2@worksheetcloud.com, and we will try and answer your questions as quickly as possible. Now, if this is the first time that you are watching a lesson with us, or if you haven't seen me before, my name is Teacher Taryn, and today we are going to learn all about measurement. We're going to look at what can we measure, how do we measure it, and what do we call those labels when we measure things. So, measurement just means that we can measure the length and the width of things that are all around us. We can compare them to see how long something is or how short it is, or which one is longer or which one is wider. And we're going to look at all those words that we use when we look at measurements. So we can talk about how short or how tall something is. So the dad, he is quite tall, and the little boy is much shorter. But we need to know how much taller the dad is. So we need to have a unit of measurement to be able to compare the two. We can also talk about how long or how short something is. So this shoe is quite long, but the green one is quite short. And we can also talk about how wide something is. So this paintbrush is quite wide if I compare it to the narrow paintbrush next door. So a very long time ago, they used to use things like hands or feet to measure things. So we're going to do that now, and you can do this at home as well. So we're looking at this green couch, and we're going to put our hand on the side. We're going to measure how many hands this couch will fit, or how long this couch is. So we're going to put our next hand right at the end of this one, and then we're going to alternate our hands all the way to the end of this couch. So now that we've gotten to the end, we can see how many hands we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and this hand is half a hand. So we have 8.5 hands. But we can say that this couch is 8.5 hands long. But we can also use feet to walk this couch off. So here's our first foot, and then we can put our next foot right in front of that one, and then we can walk all the way to the end of the couch. And here we can see that there are 6 feet, and this couch is 6 feet long. But now the problem would be that my hand is not necessarily the same size as your hand. My hand is most probably bigger than your hand. So if I said to you, please would you draw a picture that is 4 hands long, and you used your hands to measure it, it would be a much smaller picture than if you used my hands to measure the picture. So we need a unit of measurement that everybody can use. So our smallest unit of measurement is millimeters. And this is how we write it in words. But we can also say MM for short. And that is the label that we put at the end. Instead of using our hands or our feet, we can measure something in millimeters. Now, where do we find these millimeters? We can look at a ruler. And I'm sure most of you have a ruler in your pencil bag, or you might have a ruler at home or at school. And if you look at the ruler, you will see all these little black lines. And it goes all the way to the end. Now, when we count, we always start at 0, and a ruler is exactly the same. The first little line that you will see will be the 0. Now, millimeters are these teeny tiny black lines, not the big numbers, the little lines. And you will see that there are 10 little lines before you get to the 1. Now that 1 is actually for something else, and we're going to learn about those in a little bit. But these little millimeters are very, very small. And when we measure things in millimeters, we're only going to look at things that are about the size of your nail on your finger. So if you have a look at the nail on your finger, this little nail, if something is that small, you can measure it in millimeters. So the kinds of things that we are going to measure in millimeters is a paper clip, or you could measure a jelly bean, or you could measure a hair clip, or you could measure a nail or a screw, because these things are all very small. Now, once our things get a little bit bigger and we have bigger items, we're going to measure those in centimeters. And this is what centimeters looks like. And we can write cm for short. Now, centimeters we will also find on a ruler. Now, remember these little lines we said were millimeters. But now our centimeters are these much longer lines. And usually your ruler will have numbers where your centimeters will be. So this first long line will be 1 centimeter. But it will also be 10 millimeters. Now this second long line where the 2 is will be 2 centimeters. And the third one 3 centimeters and so on. So centimeters are bigger than millimeters. Now the types of things that we will measure in centimeters will usually be about the size of your finger or of your hand. So if something is that size, we will measure it in centimeters, like a pair of scissors, or an apple, or a shoe, or a leaf. Now all of these things are about the size of your hand. So you won't measure this in millimeters, you will measure these in centimeters. Now I've got 4 rulers over here and we are going to measure pencils together. So our first pencil, you can see I put the ruler right at the bottom or at the start of the pencil. So the 0 goes right at the beginning. And now I can see it isn't 1 centimeter or 2 or 3 or 4. I go and have a look where the end of my pencil is. And here I've got a dotted line to show you where that tip is. And I can see that dotted line goes all the way to the 8. So this pencil is 8 centimeters long. Let's look at the next one. Remember I put my ruler at the beginning or the start or the bottom of my pencil where the 0 would be. And then I can go and have a look where the end of my pencil is and the dotted line lands on the 6. So this pencil is 6 centimeters long. My next pencil I put at the 0 because we always start at 0, and then I can have a look where my dotted line is and how long do you think this pencil would be? Yes, it is 10 centimeters long. Now I can use millimeters to measure these pencils, but then I'm going to land up with a very big number. So I can use centimeters because these pencils would probably be the size of my finger or my hand. And the last pencil, I start at 0 and I can see that the end of my sharp pencil, the tip, is on the 14. So this pencil is 14 centimeters long. Can you see that I haven't written the whole word centimeters? I've used my short label at the end of my 14. Now we can measure other things in centimeters. We can use a tape measure and a measuring tape. And these also have millimeters or centimeters on them. Usually we'd use this if we want to measure how tall someone is or how long their arm is because it can bend. And this we would usually use if we want to measure how high a ceiling is or how wide a piece of furniture is, or a builder would use it to build a room or to measure how big the room is. Now, if we use a tape measure, we usually use meters. Now, meters are bigger than centimeters. Let's quickly remember, if something is the size as my nail, I will use millimeters. If it is the same size as my finger or my hand, I will use centimeters. Now, if something is the same size as my arm or my leg, then you will use meters. And you would usually use a tape measure to measure this. Now, what kinds of things are we going to measure in meters? The length of a couch, or the size of a swimming pool, the length or the width of the swimming pool, or a car, you could measure the height of the car, or the width of the car, or the length of the car, or the bed that you sleep in. Now we're going to have a look at a few of these items, and then we're going to decide if we would measure them in millimeters, or in centimeters, or in meters. So let's have a look at the ladybug or the ladybird that is sitting on this leaf. And now we need to decide, would we measure this in millimeters, remember the size of my finger, nail, or in centimeters, the size of my finger or my hand, or in meters, the size of my arm or my leg. So I'm definitely going to measure this in millimeters because a ladybug is the same size as your fingernail. A pencil. Would I measure a pencil in millimeters or centimeters or meters? I would measure this in centimeters because this is the same size as my hand. Would I measure a tree in millimeters or centimeters or meters? Definitely in meters because a tree is going to be longer or taller than your leg or your arm. The length of my classroom, would I measure that in millimeters or centimeters or meters? Definitely in meters. And the length or the size of a truck or a tractor or a car, I would measure in meters. And a knife, fork or a spoon, I would measure in centimeters. Now, grade 2s, you are all very clever boys and girls, and maybe you can ask mommy or daddy to help you measure how tall you are in centimeters or how tall anybody else in your family is. And then maybe you can track how you've grown. Maybe in 2 weeks' time, you can measure yourself again and see how many more centimeters you've grown in 2 weeks. Now, grade 2s, I hope you've enjoyed learning all about measurement and that you now want to go and measure things in your house. I hope you have a lovely afternoon further. And this lesson was brought to you by WorksheetCloud. Until the next time we can learn something together, goodbye, grade 2s.